Thank you for joining us for Sermons on Demand from Friendship Grace Brethren Church. We provide these videos as a way to share the pulpit messages and teachings offered at Friendship Grace Brethren Church. If you find these videos a helpful resource, please drop us a note at info@friendshipgracebrethren.com. Now open your Bibles and get ready to dig into the Word of God. Okay, we're in chapter 2, verse 8. And the way I've written this material, I've done it in some larger chunks, and so I want to read the text first, and then we'll go through it and look what we need to see out of it. Before the men lay down, she came up to them on the roof and said to the men, "I know that the Lord has given you the land, and that the fear of you has fallen upon us, and that all the inhabitants of the land melt away before you. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea before you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan, to Sihon and Og, whom you devoted to destruction. And as soon as we heard it, our hearts melted, and there was no spirit left in any man because of you. For the Lord your God, He is God in the heavens above and on the earth beneath." Chapter 2 is a vignette in between chapters 1 and chapters 3. You could take chapter 2 out and look at it separately from the rest of the historical narrative of 1, 3, 4 on. Chapter 2 is a little segment. Remember in chapter 1, Joshua tells the people, in 3 days, we're going to cross over the Jordan, okay? And then there's preparations going on, and chapter 2 happens in between him telling them that they're going over the Jordan and them getting ready and going over the Jordan. So chapter 2 is all about the spies. And I think Joshua gave it a place of prominence in his text because he was a spy originally, and he felt a kinship with what they were doing. And so we see them go. Last week we saw them going into Jericho, and now we come to the climax of this passage here. The section is often described as Rahab's statement of faith. Now, I want to warn us not to read too much into what she says. It is a dramatic statement for a polytheist to be describing Jehovah God as the sovereign of the universe. That's a dramatic statement. But I don't think we should read into that necessarily that she was fully converted at the time. We know later that she was, but we shouldn't believe that she's all of a sudden a Jehovah follower as she's going through this. And I think we can show that by like what we read in verse 11. As soon as we heard it, our hearts melted. As soon as we heard what? Look back at 10. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea before you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan, to Sihon and Og, whom you devoted to destruction. She recognized, and maybe she was one of the only ones in Jericho that recognized that there were powers and forces against them that they had no power to stop. Remember, they lived inside a double-walled city. They lived inside a city that was basically untouchable. They had water source, they had sufficient food sources, and they had a double wall with a big area of no man's land in between that is very difficult to make an assault on. So when they hear the stories of what God did for the Hebrews as they came out of Egypt and the parting of the Red Sea, what God did as they conquered the land east of the Jordan, the Hebrews got a reputation. More importantly, Jehovah God got a reputation, and they were afraid. And she was probably the most pragmatic of them all, she being Rahab. She recounted what the people of Jericho had heard about the Hebrews and about the God of the Hebrews, Jehovah. People of Jericho in the region had heard about all of those things God had done, and they began to be afraid. And rather than all of Jericho giving up, they just dug in. But Rahab was the pragmatic one, and she recognized, the only way I'm going to live through this is I'm going to have to side with them. And so she says that she will protect them. Look specifically at what she confessed to the spies. She specifically stated that they heard how the Lord had dried up the water of the Red Sea, and she uses God's proper name. Jehovah, Yahweh, Yod-Heh-Waw-Heh. This is kind of dramatic, because she must have had somehow, more than the contact with the spies, had been learning somehow, and I can only believe that she was a temple prostitute and had access to other information, is how she would recognize and be able to even say Jehovah. Because Jehovah is not one of their gods. It's not one of the many gods that they would have worshipped. So for her to say Jehovah is a big deal, and to describe him as the one that had done all of this, that's a remarkable statement for her. The fact is even more remarkable if she's a cultic temple prostitute, because she would be going against all of that temple prostitute training that she would have had. That's why I believe she was a temple prostitute, because she had the knowledge and had the ability to recognize who God was. I write in the middle of the second paragraph of this section, she was in the middle of the process of conversion. She had seen the need to side with Jehovah, but I don't think she was completely there yet. James 2:25 records that Rahab was justified through her faith in God, and demonstrated such by protecting the spies and looking towards the Hebrews and the God of the Hebrews for protection. I think this is a big deal that often when we study the book of Joshua, we kind of pass over how remarkable it is. And God rewards her in a tremendous way. She becomes one of the women listed in Jesus' lineage. There's two women listed as Jesus' ancestors. And one of them is Rahab, the temple prostitute spy protector in Jericho. And I think that's partly as a, sounds wrong, as a reward for her faith. But I think that God was demonstrating the results of faith in making her part of Jesus' family line.
Where was she in the line?
Way early. Great grandmother. Might have missed a great.
She was Salmon's mother, and Salmon had Obed, and Obed begat Jesse, and Jesse begat David.
Very good.
I just read it a couple days ago.
Yeah, isn't it interesting that the two ladies that are listed in Jesus' lineage are both Gentiles? Okay, any questions on up through verse 11, 8 through 11? Okay, let's go on to verse 12 then. Now then, please swear to me by the Lord that as I have dealt kindly with you, you also deal kindly with me, with my father's house, and give me a sure sign. That you will save alive my father and mother, my brothers and sisters, and all who belong to them, and deliver our lives from death. And the men said to her, our life for your life, even to death. If you do not tell the business of ours, then when the Lord gives us the land, we will be kindly and friendly to you. Then she let them down by a rope through the window, for her house was built into the city wall, so she lived in the wall. And she said to them, "Go into the hills, or the pursuers will encounter you, and hide there 3 days until the pursuers have returned. Then afterwards you may go your way." Then the men said to her, "We will be guiltless with respect to the oath of yours that you have made us swear. Behold, when we come into the land, you shall tie this scarlet cord in the window through which you let us down, and you shall gather into your house your father and your mother, your brothers, and all your father's household. Then if anyone goes out into the doors of your house into the street, his blood will be on his own head, and we will be guiltless. But if a hand is laid on anyone who is with you in your house, his blood shall be on your head." Our head. Thank you. "But if you tell this business of ours, then we shall be guiltless with respect to your oath that you have made us swear." One more. And she said, "According to your word, so be it." Then she sent them away, and they departed, and she tied the scarlet cord in the windows. So following her confession, Rahab requests from the spies protection of her family and herself. She recognized that she had defied the king of Jericho, a capital offense. She committed treason, siding with the enemy, and her life was going to be dead if she stayed. The spies agreed to protect her, and provided that she remained quiet and didn't give them up as king, up to the king. She also the spies required from her that she stayed in that location. You can't be running around town when the end comes, because then we won't know who's good guy and who's bad guy. So if they come out of your house, we'll protect them. If they're not in your house, it's not on us, that's on you. So she had to set the rules for her family. I just imagine that the conversation with her mom and dad was a little difficult. Hey, the Hebrews are going to come and take us, and we've got protection, but you all got to cram into my house. The spies had been locked into the city when the gate was closed, and they escaped out a window in the city wall into city wall in Rahab's house. She also provided the spies with some more intelligence on the procedures of the king's men. She said, "They'll pursue you for so long. So go and hide in the woods where they can't find you for 3 days, and then they'll give up. They'll only look for 3 days." She told them to go into hills and wait 3 days, and after 3 days the king's men will give up and head back to the city, and the spies will be free to return to Joshua in the main camp of the Hebrews. It was valuable information that provided them safe passage out of Jericho and into the camp at Gilgal. Armed with this new information, the spies gave Rahab the signal for her protection when the assault on the city would take place. The signal was a scarlet cord, a red rope, essentially, that hung out her window. They wouldn't know from the inside because they were inside. They couldn't see the window, so it was a perfect signal. They would only be protected from the Hebrews if they came out that same window. Not going out into the street, not going out another window, that same window. The spies were very careful. Otherwise, they could have been protecting everyone, and that wouldn't work very well. The spies also told Rahab that if she violated their confidence, the deal was off, and there would be no protection for her and her family. In other words, you're going to die one way or the other if you don't do it exactly like we say. You're either going to die from the king of Jericho, or you're going to die from us, so do what we say. That's the only hope you have to live. We see in this section the cooperation between the spies and Rahab. She was actively providing intelligence information to the spies for safe passage for her family and herself. It's safe to say that she recognized that Jehovah was sovereign and much more powerful than the Canaanite gods. That's an important thing for us to remember. She weighed in the balance, who's going to win this? We're afraid of the Hebrews and their God. And the only chance that she had to live was to do what the Hebrews wanted. Otherwise, they would be dead. She recognized that. In recognizing this and acting upon it, Rahab cemented herself in history and into the family tree of the eventual Messiah. Now, the next couple of points I can't prove other than this is what Jewish tradition holds. Jewish tradition holds that at some point Rahab married Joshua himself. Jewish tradition also teaches that she was one of the most beautiful women in history, and every ruler in the region had spent time with her prior to the fall of Jericho. That's one reason that I believe she was a temple prostitute. As the rulers from other city-states around Jericho would come in, they would spend time with her in the temple as a temple prostitute, and there she gathered information. So she was valuable to the king of Jericho, but that also provided her with the intelligence to know this gig is up, and I need to get out. Yeah, that's the Jewish rabbis hold to that. That's part of their additional teaching, that their commentaries on the text and so forth. There's nothing in Scripture that leads us to that, and Joshua does not fall in Jesus' lineage, so it's not through Joshua that she becomes part of Jesus' history or ancestry. But that's what the Hebrews teach, and that's a common teaching even in Judaism today.
Rich, in her gathering her family to her house, was she looked upon yet as being the temple cultic prostitute? Was her family accepted of that?
Oh yeah, because if she was a regular street prostitute, it wouldn't have been acceptable. But a temple prostitute was an acceptable position. And it was probably a wealthy position, and one that gained a lot of respect, particularly because if the Jewish tradition is true and she was one of the most beautiful women around, she was provided lots of resources as she attracted all these other kings and dignitaries into town. And so it was good for the king. Yeah, that was probably her primary role, I would guess. You know, as if the Jewish tradition is correct, and all the kings would come to her, you know, she could get lots of information that way.
So if she was married to Joshua, then how could Joshua not be part of?
Because maybe who was her son that is in the line? Salmon. Maybe Salmon comes from a different marriage. And it's not unusual to have multiple marriages. More normal for the man. Normally the wife doesn't have multiple husbands, so maybe father of Salmon died before that. Or tradition isn't correct. You know, we don't know. It ain't right.
Isn't that something, though, because of Joshua's position and later on her position in Jesus' lineage, isn't that something that you would have thought that would have included in the text if that was true?
Yeah. And Joshua's the wrong tribe anyway. So, you know, Joshua is from the tribe of Benjamin, maybe? And Jesus from the tribe of Judah. Okay, on to verse 22. They departed and went into the hills and remained there 3 days until the pursuers returned, and the pursuers searched all along the way and found nothing. Then the two men returned. They came down from the hills and passed over and came to Joshua the son of Nun, and they told him all that had happened. And they said to Joshua, "Truly the Lord has given all the land into our hands, and also all the inhabitants of the land melt away because of us." Now think of this intelligence information. Joshua and the troops had not yet had contact with people west of the Jordan. And so they didn't yet know what the reputation, if any, was as they began to enter the land. So the spies come and say, listen, they're afraid of us. We have a big reputation. We're a mighty army, they think. How? Ephraim. Tribe of Ephraim? Thank you. Bonjour said so. So think of that. This intelligence information was more than just, this is how we're getting in. It was all about, they really think we're tough. Now, Joshua knew that God had given the land, and Joshua had told the people, but here they're recognizing now that God has given us this land, and He has instilled in the people a reputation. That had to be a confidence boost for them. So much different than the first set of spies that Moses sent out that Joshua was part of. Remember, they went into the land and 10 of the 12 said, they got giants over there and we can't do nothing. We're just going to die. And these spies went in and said, we've got this. The Lord has already given this to us and they're afraid of us. That's what you want. You want your military to be feared by your enemy. Maybe the United States will get back to that point. To be feared by the enemy. That's what Joshua was building up to. Well, I shouldn't say Joshua. I should say what God was building up to. Because what we begin to see in chapter 3 changes that whole paradigm again. The spies recognized that God had already provided them victory. That's a remarkable statement. Truly, the Lord has given us all the land into our hands. They're looking at it as something that's already completed because they're that confident in what God was going to do. So let's move on to chapter 3. As I said, chapter 2 is a little vignette of the experience of the spies. Chapter 1 ends with Joshua telling the commanders, go out into the camp and tell them to get prepared, for in 3 days we go across. And then chapter 2 is the spies, and now we go into chapter 3. Chapter 2 is a parenthetical section placed between chapters 1 and 3. In 1:11, Joshua ordered the people to prepare to cross the Jordan in 3 days. Then chapter 2, we have the account of the spies. And in chapter 3, we go back to the preparation to cross the Jordan. I said earlier they were camped at Gilgal. They were not. They were still east of the Jordan. My mistake. After receiving the intelligence report from the spies and entering from the spies who were teeming with confidence that God had given the land to them, Joshua takes another step in preparing for the conquest. He moves the people to the east bank of the Jordan River. There he waited for the people to be assembled and ready for the next step. So let's look at 3:1. Then Joshua rose early in the morning, and they set out from Shittim, and they came to the Jordan. He and all the people of Israel lodged there before they passed over. So they got their assembly together and they marched up to the river, and there they stopped. Because now we have some important things to accomplish. We know from chapter 3 verse 15 that the Jordan River was above its normal level and at flood stage. This was a normal occurrence during the spring when the snowmelt from Mount Hermon and spring rains overflowed the Jordan. So what was normally confined to the banks of the Jordan was now spread wide out, so that the lowlands in what is later called the Araba, or the Jordan River Valley, is full of water. If I were a military tactician, I wouldn't go to cross when the river is the highest. I'd wait till it's the lowest. Unless I had Seabees or somebody to build me a bridge. And he didn't. They had to go through the river, or they had to wait on God. And so God takes them to the point of the highest time of the river. We think of the mighty Jordan as a big river. It's not. You drive over the Caloosahatchee, you'll drive over the Jordan River 4 times. It's a small river, except at this time of the year. It gets pretty wide. And not real deep, but it's still pretty wide. And it's flowing along because of all that snow melt and all that spring rain. God brought them to this location at this time for a purpose. He was still bringing the people to believe that he would win, that they would win because of his power and not their own might. We should add to the complications that apparently Joshua was led by God to bring the Hebrews to a location to cross the river that was in full view of the Canaanite spies. They didn't go south where Jericho couldn't see. They didn't go north where Jericho couldn't see. They went right to in the middle of the plain, right in the middle of the valley, where Jericho had a perfect line of sight. So as they began to go across the river, Jericho could look out and see they're getting ready to come across the river. In full view. That's not the way, good military tacticians do it. There may have been there were many places that were better to cross, but this is where God had taken them. Again, to demonstrate that the taking of the promised land was going to occur in God's time and in God's power, and not that of Joshua and his people. Verses 2 through 6. And at the end of 3 days, the officers went through the camp and commanded the people, as soon as you see the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God being carried by the Levitical priest, then you set out from your place and follow it. Yet there shall be a distance between you and it, about 2,000 cubits in length. Do not come near it, in order that you may know the way you shall go, for you have not passed this way before. Then Joshua said to the people, consecrate yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you. And Joshua said to the priests, take up the ark of the covenant and pass on before the people. So they took up the ark of the covenant and went before the people. Now, I want you to think about this. They went into, they camped on the east side of the Jordan, and they were told, get ready, prepare yourself, sanctify yourself, make yourself holy, and when you see the ark, the priests carrying the ark, then you get up and follow. But stay 2,000 cubits behind. Cubit is this long. Well, depending on how big you are, but it's essentially from the elbow to the tip of the fingers is a cubit. So you stay 2,000 of those away. What's God doing when he says that? It's holy. And you remember that it's holy. But what else is he doing? He's sending the priests with the most valuable possession that Israel has. All out there by themselves. What would a modern military do? They would send out scouts first, and then they would send out special forces, and then they would send out regiments of men. But God puts out his priests and the most valuable artifact in front of them. When it gets up, you get up and you follow. That's a remarkable thing. It wasn't the military that was leading in the conquest. It was what represented who God was and where God comes to meet with them. It represents God's Word. What's inside of the ark? The Ten Commandments. The second copy of the Ten Commandments. Because the first ones, remember, Moses broke. And so these are the ones that Moses, ding, 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 chiseled out. Because the ones that God wrote with his fingers, Moses broke. And so, what else is in there? Aaron's staff. That demonstrates the power of God. And some manna. And some golden hemorrhoids. So, those are the hemorrhoids. What were you saying? What word? Rats. That is not the word that I heard you say. So, the most important, most valuable thing that Israel has, Their connection to God is put out in front to be followed. It is clear God was establishing, as they made conquest into the promised land, we are following God. We're not following Joshua, we're following God. It's all about following God. It's all about being holy. A separation between God's stuff and my stuff. That 2,000 cubits.
It's only a half a mile.
That's a pretty good distance. It's 30,000 feet? Oh, 3,000. Wow. Aren't we spunky this morning?
No, I just had a calculator.
So, why would God establish that distance? What's accomplished by it?
More fear.
Fear of who?
Fear of God.
How fear?
Because Joshua and them are so confident that they're sending their most precious thing ahead of them. So that should tell the other people that they're so confident that they're sending it out first.
Okay.
Or it also tells them that, it tells everyone, the Hebrews and also the people in Jericho, that God is leading, and the people in Jericho are already afraid of God. So they think that he's leading the battle, and in charge of the battle. They're going to be, they're going to be more afraid than if this ragtag group of Hebrews
But you couldn't say that again.
come after them.
Yeah. I think there's another point that we're missing. If the Hebrews were all uptight to the ark, how many could see the ark? The people right uptight around the ark. If there's a 2,000 cubit separation, how many could see the ark? Everyone. The focus wasn't on the leading people, the focus was on God. That's the point. That God was making it such that his holy ark was viewed by all the people and they could see God going across the river. And they could follow them. That's the point, I think. The next instruction was aimed at the spiritual preparation of the people prior to experiencing the work of God. Joshua told the people to consecrate themselves because tomorrow they would witness wonders completed by God. If I were a military leader at that time period, I would say sharpen your swords and sharpen your arrows. Get prepared for battle. And God says, no, make yourself holy. Because I'm going to do a mighty work. So get ready to watch me work. It's all about what God was going to do and not what they were going to do. The command was not a military command, but was a spiritual command, so they were prepared to see God work through them. The idea here of consecrate is to make holy, to make pure, to set apart. Joshua was telling the people to make themselves ready to see God do a wondrous work in their midst. It's the same command that Moses gave to the people around Mount Sinai when they were told to receive the law. Get prepared to see God do. It was the command. Not only were the Hebrews to be consecrated or prepared for the work of God, they were to expect God to do a mighty miracle. Sometimes I think we don't expect God to do miracles. We don't expect him to do something out of the ordinary. And so we just settle for the ordinary, rather than expecting God to do a mighty miracle. It's one of one of my great admirations for Jim Brown up in Goshen. They always anticipate God to do miracles. They pray that way. They're giving away a Harley-Davidson Sportster this morning to some dad. And they anticipate doing about 300 baptisms in the field this morning at the church service. And I wouldn't be surprised if later tonight we don't get a report that 200 or 300 or 400 people came to know the Lord this morning. But I watched Jim's prayer with his staff for this Dad Fest. They do it every year on Father's Day. And that's what they were praying for. And every time they pray that way, that's the way it happens. They anticipate God to do miracles. Joshua told the priests to take up the ark and pass it in front of the people. The priests complied with the order and passed in front of the people. God was ensuring that the transition from Moses to Joshua was complete, and that the people saw that Joshua was God's chosen man to lead the Hebrews into the promised land. God was establishing and solidifying Joshua's leadership and the reality that Joshua was following God's commands. I think this whole process was about setting Joshua up and reminding them that what they're going to do is through God's power. And Joshua was leading them in doing this miraculous thing in God's power. Verse 7. Then the Lord said to Joshua, "Today I will begin to exalt you in the sight of Israel, that you may know that as I was with Moses, so I will be with you. And as for you, command the priests who bear the ark of the covenant, when you come to the brink of the waters of the Jordan, you shall stand still in the Jordan." And Joshua said to the people of Israel, "Come here and listen to the words of the Lord your God." And Joshua said, "Here is how you shall know that the living God is among you, and that he will without fail drive out from before you the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Hivites, the Perizzites, the Girgashites, the Amorites, and the Jebusites. And behold, the ark of the covenant of the Lord and of all the earth is passing before you into the Jordan. Now therefore take 12 men from the tribes of Israel, and from each tribe a man. And when the sole of the feet of the priest bearing the ark of the Lord of all the earth, shall rest in the waters of the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan shall be cut off from flowing, and its water coming down from above shall stand in one heap." That's a powerful passage. We see in this section God telling Joshua that today God was going to elevate Joshua in front of the people. He was establishing the credentials and authority of Joshua over the people and as God's representative to the people. What better way to establish God's choosing and blessing Joshua than to part the swollen river for him like God parted the Red Sea for Moses? You know, when you think about it, this is a perfect way to say, Moses was my guy, now Joshua is my guy. For Moses, I parted the Red Sea, and for Joshua, I parted the Jordan River, the swollen Jordan River. The river would not part until the feet of the priests actually entered the water. God didn't demonstrate his power until Joshua reiterated to the people the promise from God to drive out all the Canaanites and the other people from the land, giving it to the Hebrews. It's a major part of the command from God that became a problem for Israel. They were to remove all the people from the land so that the people would not draw them away from following God, but Israel did not follow the command completely. In this passage, notice what the key to victory is. It was not the military might of Joshua and the Hebrews. It was not their overwhelming force and power. It was the promise of the living God who was among them, who promised to remove the occupants before them. Throughout the 7-year conquest period, this became a reminder of what they were doing. They were following God who would keep his promise. Now, I got a couple of it doesn't show up real well. But you can imagine as they're encamped in this area here, this is this is the Araba. You see the plain there of the valley, the Jordan Valley? That may have all been underwater. Some years leading up to the hills on either side, the entire Jordan River Valley is flooded. Depending on the snowfall in Mount Hermon and the rain to the north in Galilee, that entire river basin floods. If that's the case, we're talking about maybe a 10 or 15 mile crossing. That's a lot of water that they would have to go through here to make this. And where does God bring them? He brings them right there into the doorstep of Jericho. It says, that's where you're going across. The enemy is going to see you coming across. Now, part of this command that we haven't talked about a lot is there in verse 13. And when the soles of the feet of the priests bearing the ark of the Lord of all the earth, shall rest in the waters of the waters of the Jordan shall be cut off from flowing. When did God's miracle begin? When they were obedient. God didn't do a miracle and then they said, oh, well, let's follow. They had to follow, and then God started the miracle. And we learn it later on in the text, but God stopped up the water miles up the river. This wasn't, when we watch Cecil B. DeMille's The Ten Commandments, they're crossing the Red Sea in a fairly narrow gulf, right, where he separated the water. Here in Jordan, God divides the water and gives them miles to cross on, because there were hundreds of thousands of troops to come. And in order to get them all across in a day, what do you got to do? You got to have a wider highway, because on foot you can only go so fast, and you're just as fast as the guy in front of you. So God made it really wide. He stopped the water up well north, up here somewhere. Right there. Yeah. Waters of Jordan stopped right there. So all of this was dry. So they could cross relatively quickly. Now, you know what it's like. We've seen rain here recently. You know what it's like when you get a lot of rain and then it stops raining and the water recedes. It's still muddy and stuff, right? This was dry ground. God dried it up, and they walked through and didn't have to slog through the mud. They walked through, and God provided for them resources. What's my other map? Oh, that's where the conquest went. We'll see that more later on in our study.
So all of the people on the other page.
All of the people on the other page. Oh, the listing of ites. Those are the ites. Canaanites, the Jebusites, and so forth.
So were they not part of some of the other tribes? Where did these people, are these people from Edom?
These are all descendants.
Esau and
Some are. The Edomites are number 5, descendants of Esau.
so these are people from Ishmael?
Well, it spells it out there. The Amalekites are descendants of Amalek, the firstborn of Esau. The Ammonites are the descendants of Ammon, the grandson of Lot. The Amorites are a general term for the inhabitants of the land, but especially for the descendants of Canaan. The Canaanites, broadly speaking, are the descendants of Canaan, son of Ham, son of Noah. Edomites, the Gebalites, Geshurites. That's why I gave you the chart, so that the ites would make a little more sense of who they are and where they come from. Now, understand, these were not Muslims, because Islam didn't exist yet. Islam begins almost 700 years after Jesus. And these guys are 1,400 years before Jesus. So these are mostly Arabs. Some are not even Arabs. Some are Persian. The which one was I looking at yesterday to see Persians? I don't remember. I think it was the Perizzites. Anyway, they're descendants of Ishmael, descendants of Lot, descendants of Abraham's other sons, descendants of others, and it's a variety of people. It is too simplistic to think that dwelling in the Middle East are the descendants of Israel, the Jews, and the descendants of Ishmael, the Arabs. It's not that simple. There's way too many other peoples, and that's one reason for the chart. Other questions? Okay, let's pray then. Father, thank you for the picture of your authority, your power, your might, as you provided conquest to the land to Joshua and the Hebrews. Thank you for this story, and it reminds us of who you are. Give us a great time in the service to follow, that we might honor you and glorify you as we worship you in song and in fellowship and further study of your word. We love you, and we ask that you care for those that are not able to be with us today, and that those that are listening or watching online would also be moved to serve you and to follow you. We love you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you for watching or listening to this teaching on demand from Friendship Grace Brethren Church. Please consider sending us an email at info@friendshipgracebrethren.com to let us know how this teaching may have helped you. Please also consider joining us in person at Friendship Grace Brethren Church, located at 10251 Metro Parkway, Suite 116, Fort Myers, Florida, just south of the intersection of Metro and Colonial Boulevard. Sunday school begins at 9 and worship service at 10 a.m. We look forward to seeing you in person at Friendship Grace Brethren Church.